Hello and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at JavaScript arrays. The lesson will take very much the same format as the last lesson, where we'll step through some code and we'll see what's going on under the hood. So let's start with this first line of code. I'll run it and we'll see what's happened is that it's created a variable numbers1 and it's assigned to it this array. The array is actually just another type of object in JavaScript, and it gets created in the heap. So in our diagram over here, let's just create that array in the heap. And the numbers1 variable then is assigned the location of the array in the heap. So we'll put a pointer in there to represent that. And in our second line of code, we create another variable numbers2 and we assign to it whatever's in numbers1. So here's numbers2 and we'll assign to it that pointer. So now they're both pointing at the same array. And we can see that over here, numbers1 and numbers2, both pointing to the same array. In JavaScript, there are some functions built into the language which operate on arrays, and one of those is this function here, push. And when we call it, let's do that now, we can see it's added the number 60 to the end of the array. And we'll put that into our diagram. What's happened here is we've referenced the array through numbers2, so 60 is being added to the numbers2 array, but of course numbers1 is also pointing to it, so we can see here both of them are pointing to the same array still, and it's got 60 added to it. In the last lesson we looked at destructuring syntax for objects. We use this to create new variables. There is also destructuring syntax for arrays. It's slightly different. We use square brackets rather than curly braces, but the basic syntax is very similar. Here we're creating 3 new variables, first, second and third, and they're going to take the first 3 values of the array, so 10, 20 and 30. Let's just step over that. And again, we can see over here, first has got 10, second is 20, and third is 30. And because arrays are just a type of object, when they're passed as parameters into functions, exactly the same thing is going to happen as we saw in the last lesson. So let's just step into this function. And what's happened here is this parameter items has now been created as a new variable. So I'll just create that in my little diagram. Items, and it's assigned the value of the argument. So we call print array this numbers1 as the argument, so whatever the values in that was copied into items. So that was of course this pointer pointing to the location yet again of the same array. So items is now pointing to that array too. In JavaScript we have this syntax for I of items, where items is something you can iterate over, but I is going to take each value of items in turn and then it'll execute the code in the curly braces, so console.log when I is 10 and then 20 and so on. So once this function is completed, we can look in the console window and we can see that all 6 numbers have been printed out. Now in this next line of code, I'm just declaring a function. I'm saying that log is a variable that contains an arrow function, and the arrow function takes a parameter I and it prints it out in the console. And then forEach is yet another function that's built into the JavaScript language and that operates on arrays. And the way forEach works is you pass it a parameter, which is a function, and it calls this function for each item in the array. So in our case, it's going to call log for each item in the numbers array. And so we'll expect to see log print 10, 20, and so on. So let's just step over that line and we'll go back to the console and we can see 10 to 60 has been printed out a second time. Now, here I created a variable called log, which contained an arrow function, and then I passed the variable into forEach as a parameter. I didn't really need to create the variable. I could have just passed the arrow function in directly, and that's what I'm doing here. So let's just step over this. And again, if we go to the console, we'll see now 10 to 60 has been printed out another time. So another function built into the JavaScript language for arrays is the filter function. And just like for each, it takes a parameter, which is a function, and it calls the function on every item in the array. This variable under 40 contains an arrow function. It takes a parameter and it returns a value. It returns true or false, depending on is I less than 40. So under 40 is called 6 times for each of the values in the array. When we pass 10, 20, and 30, the under 40 function will return true. But the next 3 times we're going to pass 40, 50, and 60, and under 40 will return false. So the filter function, having received these results, it creates an array which contains the items in numbers 1 for which under 40 return true. So it'll create a new array containing 10, 20, and 30. So let me just step over there, and we can see over here U1 contains 10, 20, and 30. And just like before, I can shorten my syntax. I don't need the under 40 variable. I can just pass the arrow function straight in. And we'll see U2 again has these 3 values. And map is very similar. So map is a function built into the JavaScript language. It operates on an array and it passes each value in the array to a function. So here we're passing it a function square, so it's going to call square with a value 10 and then 20, 30 and so on. And again, square is a function which returns a value. It returns the number squared. So map's going to call square 6 times, it's going to pass it 10, 20, 30, and it's going to receive back the square of 10, the square of 20, and so on. And it's going to build a brand new array with the results that were passed back to it. So we'll see S1 contains 100 and 400 and so on. So let me just step over those 2 lines of code. And somewhere over here, S1, there we are, it's got 100, 400, and so on. And lastly, I've used this shortened syntax where I don't bother creating the actual square variable. I just pass the arrow function straight in. And we'll see that S2 contains these same 6 values. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next lesson.